right now, and our guest is Kirby Anderson, and Kirby's been on with us once a month. He's the president of Probe Ministry. You still the president of Probe?
I'm still the president of Probe right down here where we're in the midst of global warming.
It's global warming Dallas today. But Kirby's
it's going to be a good conversation you're going to have next hour. That's great.
Yeah. So Kirby's president of Probe Ministries. He's also the host of the radio program Point of View. It's been around for 3 decades now, or 4. 3 or 4. I don't know. How long has Point of View been on the air?
More than 40 years, back in 1972 when Marlon Maddox started it off. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is, and it's heard in the evenings here on American Family Radio Talk, the Point of View show, and that's probably the longest, or oldest, I should say, Christian talk show dealing with issues in the country. I can't think of another one.
I would think so, yeah. And Marlon was, I think, the first person up on satellite, at least for Christian media.
Yeah.
So, he was kind of a pioneer. And then your dad certainly saw how to pioneer those same ideas and expand the American Family Radio Network, which we're talking on today. So
I never will
certainly owe a debt of gratitude to those two men.
That name is familiar, I know, to a lot of people listening to us right now. Marlon Maddox, and he was kind of the father of Christian talk radio. And Marlon passed away a few years ago, but I just remember when I was when I would work in the printing room. I mentioned this to you before, Kirby. You know what I'm going to say probably, but
Sure.
This back about 1980, I guess it was 80, 81, 79, right in there. Anyway, I was in high school and I was working for my dad part time, and I was running the offset machine, the printer, some people know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that thing was very loud. I mean, very loud. So if you're going to listen to anything, I didn't have earphones, so I would have my radio back there in the print shop, and I'd have Marlon Maddox on from 1 to 2:30 every day, and I'd have that volume so turned up everybody in the building could hear the show. Because I had it over the offset machine. But I just remember every day at 1 o'clock, I'd say, man, I can't wait to hear what Marlon Maddox has to say today, or the guest he has, or the topics he's going to cover, and you carry on the tradition now today on that program that goes across the country, including on our network here, AFR. Well, let's talk about this, Kirby. I wrote a column, by the way, which is available at onenewsnow.com. We just put it up there a little while ago, onenewsnow.com. And I wrote a column in response to another article I saw a few days ago in USA Today, and it was quoting some fellow believers, authors, and pastors and such, just a few of them. The article originated in Tennessee, the Nashville area. It was out of the Tennessean, but then the USA Today picked it up and ran it as a national story. But basically, these were fellow Christians, and they were saying basically that the war on Christmas doesn't exist, or if it does, it's not important. And I was really disappointed in that, so I said I'll write a column in response to this, because I don't think that our brothers and sisters there fully grasp what is happening in our country and how it relates to the war on Christmas. First of all, Kirby, in your view, is there a war on Christmas, and what is it really about?
Sure. First of all, for the person that would say there is no war on Christmas, just ask them, what sources would you take as possible evidence that there is? And you could look at, for example, Tony Perkins and Kelly Shackelford have put together a very good piece on religious hostility in America. And in that, which runs for about 70 pages, there are all sorts of examples that happened during the Christmas period. So here, 2 reputable organizations, Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council, Kelly Shackelford with Liberty Institute, have documented this with footnotes and everything. That should be enough. Okay, you say, no, I really want more of a secular source. Okay, let's try Bill O'Reilly on Fox News, probably the most listened to cable news network, certainly in the evening, and look at all the things he's written about. Then I have a whole series of books on my shelf by other individuals who either directly or indirectly refer to this, and this is the Rutherford Institute. These are secular people writing for places like Weekly Standard and on and on and on. So first of all, to say that there isn't is to really turn a blind eye to a lot of that. But the bigger question that you're asking is, well, what's the difference? Because a lot of times I can move people quickly off of that. All right, maybe there's a few of those, but those are isolated cases. And the point I make is if you cannot say Merry Christmas in a public arena, pretty soon you can't say Jesus Christ in a public arena. Pretty soon you can't witness. It's the same issue related to the cross cases that have come from the Supreme Court. If you cannot put a cross in the Mojave Desert, and that has to be covered up with plywood, what chance do Christians have in the future of expressing any kind of views in the public arena if a cross or a statement like Merry Christmas is controversial? So I just want our listeners to recognize that this is not just kind of some small tangential issue that only is happening in a few places. I can pretty easily document that it's happening all over the country, and that the pushback that we have through American Family Radio and others have been able to do is making a difference. And when people look at that naughty and nice list, they make consumer choices about who they're going to go to and which stores they're going to actually go into. And I think this is why this is such an important battle.
If you folks will go to get my column I've written on this, it's called A Response to Those Who Say There Is No War on Christmas. I wrote it yesterday and we put it up this morning. If you go to the website onenewsnow.com, onenewsnow.com, it'll be on one of those banners that come along there, on the alternating banners that come along there at the top of the website page, and it says to those who say there is no war on Christmas, and then I write about this because folks, what's happening? You know, we talk every year. I could list you a litany of examples of this, where we've had nativity scenes that have been on courthouse squares for decades, if not centuries, are being told they got to take them down. Parades are being changed from Christmas to holiday parades or to winter parades. You no longer take Christmas break at school. You go on holiday, or you go on winter breaks. They're changing the name of, they're saying to kids who've sang Christmas carols, you can't do that any longer. You got to stick with Frosty the Snowman or nothing at all. You can't sing anything about Jesus Christ or the reason for the real holiday season. Now, that doesn't happen everywhere. It depends on what part of the country you're in a lot of times. But it is going on, and it is going there. That used to not be the case, but in the last 10 years, 15 years, these secular humanists or secular progressives, we sometimes call them liberals, but not all liberals agree with the secular progressive movement necessarily. But they, as Bill O'Reilly talked about last night on his talking points, they are hostile to the Judeo-Christian traditions of America. And so they're trying to diminish the role of Christmas in our society. Why? Because Christmas reminds people about Christianity. I mean, it's the one day of the year, the most notable day of the year, where all of Americans are, reminded of the life of Christ. Easter is extremely significant to the Christian faith. Without it, we wouldn't have the Christian faith, the resurrection. But Easter is not as popular with the general American public as is Christmas, and so Christmas is the one day that everybody remembers the life of Jesus Christ. You're almost forced to because it's everywhere. Both these secular progressives, the Christian haters, I call them, they wouldn't call themselves that, but basically that's what they're doing. They're saying we need to eradicate Christmas from the culture because it reminds people about Christianity. So that's what's going on. I've written about it at the onenewsnow.com website. You can access that column there and send it to as many people as you would want to. One of the gentlemen that I quote here, Kirby, in this column, and Ray, you might want to comment on it, and I'm sure he is a wonderful pastor. and a good brother. But his name is he's the Christ Church in Nashville. He's the senior pastor. His name is Dan Scott. Anyway, he's quoted in an article, this USA Today article I was referring to, and here is what Pastor Scott said when asked by the USA Today about the Christmas in the public arena. He says, quote, we really need to find a way to treat the public square as the public square and private realms as private realms, and not feel demonized because we come from a different perspective. Now, listen what Pastor has just said here. Quote, we really need to we need a way to treat the public square as the public square and private realms as private realms, and not feel demonized because we come from a different perspective, end of quote. Now, Kirby, the only way I can interpret what Brother Dan is saying here is, as long as we keep Christmas in the church and in the home, we're good, okay?
Right.
But we can't expect that the general public acknowledge Christmas because it's dealing with Christianity. So we sort of need to give up that fight. How else do you read something like that?
Yeah, I think Dan Scott is doing what, unfortunately, a lot of Christians that are even evangelical Christians do, and that is they have this sacred secular dichotomy. They say, well, the public square, we can have all sorts of secular conversations, but you can't take any sacred ideas in there. And I have a different way to think about that. He talks about the public square, and I've said this on this program before, but let me say it again. What he's suggesting is that we need to have kind of a naked public square. That is, the public square needs to be stripped of Christian values. And that is a phrase that was used years ago by a very famous author. And so what we're not arguing for is a sacred public square where we enforce our ideas on individuals, which is what he's implying. What we want is an open public square. In other words, the atheists have a right if they want to express their views in the public square, and Hindus have a right if they want to express their views in the public square. Muslims have the right to express their views in the public square, and most importantly, Christians have a right to express their views in the public square. But he sort of bought into this idea that, well, anything that's religious does not belong in the public square. So secular people get to dominate that, and so atheists and humanists and progressives, they can say anything they want in the public square, but when you're a Christian, if you have any religious things to say, you need to keep that to yourself. I don't buy the argument. I know you don't either.
No. Ray, you want to chime in here on this whole thing?
Kirby, I have a question I'd like to pose to you. I think Tim's entirely right that the pushback here, interestingly, when we've been talking about the war on Christmas, the pushback has not come so much from the leftist or from the secular progressives or whatever you want to call them. It's really come from other people inside the Christian community. And I've heard two different responses. I've heard some people say, well, it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what Radio Shack does. It doesn't matter if you go to a store and people say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, that we shouldn't care about that. That's one kind of response. And then there's another kind of response, more interesting to me, the people who say, and they point out, truly Christians are suffering in the Sudan and in India and in Pakistan and across the Muslim world and the house church movement in China. How can we, given the amount of suffering that goes on in the Christian world, how can we even raise this issue at all? So, Kirby, how do we navigate between the criticism on the one side that it doesn't matter and the true observation that our brothers and sisters around the world suffer greatly for their faith? How do we position correctly our thoughts on this war on Christmas?
Well, again, I think the quick answer to the first one, why does it matter? It's a good example of use it or lose it. And that is, if we don't stand up for some of these issues, then we lose our rights. And the reason that we applaud groups like Liberty Institute and Alliance Defending Freedom and the Rutherford Institute and on and on and on, we can go down the long list, is because we recognize that there is this encroachment into our lives. And if we just say, it doesn't matter, pretty soon we're going to find ourselves, now that brings us to the second point, like some of the people in other countries. I won't use the Sudan, but if you go to Europe right now, I mean, it is already pretty hostile towards Christian values. And if you can't say Merry Christmas, pretty soon you can't say Jesus Christ. If you can't talk about
Right.
red
Right.
and green napkins at a children's school, and are told that you can only talk about snow people. I don't know what a snow people is, but I'm giving you real examples from public school not far from where I'm broadcasting from right now that said, no, we can't have candy canes, we can't have any kind of red and green napkins. I mean, if you're already drawing the line there and saying we can't do anything that reminds anybody of Christmas, which aren't even Christian, imagine how difficult it's going to be eventually for people to be able to preach the gospel, to use sidewalk evangelism and the rest. And so I'll be the first to admit, sure, we recognize that compared to the persecution some Christians are facing right now in North Korea, in Albania, in Sudan, maybe even in China, is more than what we're facing here. But we need to do what we can to hold on to our freedom. And we don't have to, do an either or. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, even this week on my radio program, we've talked about everything from sexual trafficking to persecuted Christians. But, also one of those conversations seems appropriate, and that is to talk about the war on Christmas. Otherwise, someday we'll look around, and our country is going to look a lot more like Europe, might even look like some of those other countries I mentioned. That's why I think it's worth standing up for these issues.